Ouais, je sais. Mais ici, avec le bracelet et les... Yes? Ja. Dan moet hem goed dicht bij. 2 more minutes.
Voilà. Mais donc, à part ça, je vois que ça passe.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please ask your attention? Unfortunately, we have a bit more people than expected, but that's a good thing. Stay tuned. You can find the seat. There are still some available, so fight for them.
And otherwise, yeah, there is enough place, I think, around the seats. So first, I would like to thank you all for being here. I welcome you with the whole Hive team at this event, our fourth edition of Blockchain in Practice, with tonight's topic, public versus private blockchains. The idea is not to say that one is right and the other is wrong, but rather to better understand the exact differences between both, so that we can all go home with more understand better, to understand it better. So what we will have is Roderick van der Veer from Settlement explaining the difference between both. Then we will have a panel of people discussing, debating the subject. Then we'll have a little break of 30 minutes where you can eat something and drink something. After that, we'll have 1 more hour of presentations where 4 projects will pitch their project in 5 minutes. Then in 5 minutes explain how they use blockchain in a more private or in a public way. And then you will have an after work, so some more networking with more food and drinks. Important is that in those rooms in glass, so you have a virtual reality room where you can do some virtual reality. In the middle, augmented reality, so you can test augmented reality. And in the end, with that crazy Russian guy there, you can have some presentations concerning mining of cryptocurrencies. If you want to attend one of the workshops around it, you will have to register. There are 3 sessions of 10 minutes each, 1 during the first break and then the 2 others at the end. So without any further ado, I would like to... Oh yeah, sorry, quite important. So we are using an application called Slido. You join it by simply going on slido.com and putting the hashtag Hive. It's a tool that we use so that people can easily ask their questions to the speaker or to the panel. The idea is that you can input a question in an anonymous way, and people can upvote the questions that they think are really interesting. So join it, ask some questions. Without any further ado, I would like to welcome Roderick for the presentation explaining the difference between public and blockchain.
Good evening, everyone. Who's hot? Me too. Okay, so a little bit about myself. My name is Roderick van der Veer, technologist at heart. Been fascinated by technology all my life. Closer to my mouth. Been fascinated by technology all my life. Been working in it for over 15 years before starting Settlement. Why? Because we got bitten by blockchain, just as probably all of you here, and we figured out we could do an immense amount of things with it. Not going to do it today. You can come by afterwards if you want one. We're powered by a kick-ass team. We have 2 locations, Leuven and Dubai, about 16 people right now, and we're actively hiring. So anyone wanting to join their current firm, leave their current firm, just let me know. So first, I was asked to do a little bit of an introduction in what is blockchain, and I will do it with one very, very long sentence. For me, it's my definition, because everybody probably has a different one. For me, blockchain is technology which gives us decentralized storage of transactions, of data, and a decentralized consensus mechanism, which enables peer-to-peer transactions according to predefined rules, without the need for third parties to enforce rules, and by being the technology, by being what it is, provide the trust that those rules will be enforced. Now, most important thing in this sentence is actually the first line. Blockchain is a technology. Which means, when we look at blockchains, especially as I do from a technical perspective, we look at it like any technology. Cutting in and out a bit, but no problem. So, we look at it like a technology. Matter of fact, blockchains have 2 purposes. They have the purpose of the technology, and they have cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency part is in no way related to any technical underpinnings of these blockchains. Could just be money, would be the same thing. So we're not going to discuss anything about cryptocurrency, the price of cryptocurrency, or if it has value or not. That's your problem. Now, before really getting to the public versus private thing, I've got to get something off my chest. Actually, the question doesn't make any sense. Public versus private. What does that mean? What does public mean? What does private mean? Can something be both public and private? We don't know. Now, for me, this question is actually 2 questions in one. First question, who has access to the blockchain? Can anyone access it? Or are you barred from accessing it? Are there people who can say what you can and cannot do? Can a participant in this blockchain do everything? Is every action available or not? So actually the question becomes, how open is this blockchain? The second question is, who enforces the rules? If you remember the definition, it's the rule enforcement that makes us have the trust in this technology to solve something. Who does it? Who has the right to write a new block, a new transaction into the chain? Mining, for example. Which mechanism determines if you can mine? Are there some rules attached to it? Are there some limitations to it? So actually the question here becomes, is how decentralized is the chain? Who is it either decentralized, meaning nobody can say what I can and cannot do? Or is it centralized, means somebody has some sense of control? Everybody with me so far? All right. So, second thing I need to tell you before we can get started is, in blockchain, there's a trilemma. It's a cool word, didn't invent it myself. Problem is, there are 3 things that make that are difficult in blockchains. It's one, the decentralization. The fact, how do you keep it spread out across the world? How can you keep it running with millions of users? How can you keep it running with millions of people actually writing to the blockchain? Scalability, how do you keep it open for everyone? How do you keep it running in transaction rates? And then you have security. How do you enforce those rules and prevent anyone from doing something they shouldn't? So actually, you can pick two of these three. So either you have a very scalable and very secure network, but then it will be centralized. Or you have a very secure, very decentralized system, and then you have no scalability. And nobody up until now has been able to solve this trilemma. Now, it's all easy, all words. We're going to put some change on these two axes and determine if they are and what they are. So let's start. There's a group of blockchains, and they use the proof of work consensus mechanism. The proof of work consensus mechanism is slow, meaning it's not scalable, but it's secure and it's very decentral, which gives us an opportunity to build blockchains like the Bitcoin blockchain, like Monero, like Ethereum, where the characteristics are that they are open. Anyone can join these blockchains, anyone can run a node, that they are decentralized, anyone can mine a block, okay? For the bigger ones you need big hardware nowadays, but still, everyone can join a mining pool if they want to. And these are open, decentralized, unfortunately not scalable in any sense that we find relevant in most cases. Of course, Ethereum is moving up, of changing to proof of stake. Proof of stake, everybody knows proof of work, right? Need to go back to proof of work? It's just calculating some stupid puzzle, very long, very hard. Nothing magic about it. Proof of stake, kind of similar, but instead of having to calculate a lot of things, you have to pay a certain amount up front. If you want to mine a block, if you do something wrong, they take the money away. It's okay if it's 10 cents, if it's 1500 Ether, you probably have some concerns about doing so. If you want to do 2 bad transactions or 2 bad blocks, this doubles, etc., etc. Now, proof of stake, more scalable. You don't need to calculate anymore. You don't need big hardware anymore. Problem is, you need at least, they changed it this week from 1500 to 32 Ether, but you need at least 32 Ether before you're even allowed in to the list of possible miners, which immediately cuts out like X% of the human population, meaning it's less open. Yes, you can still join. Yes, you can still send transactions, but you're no longer able to participate in building new blocks on the block. Next up, NEO and EOS. NEO is actually, they run consensus mechanisms, variations of delegated proof of stake. I see somebody laughing, must have lots of EOS. They're actually not decentralized at all. NEO has 9 miners. 9 miners, all owned by the NEO Foundation, which is literally no better than me having a server telling you how much money you have. EOS does better. They have 21, except they ever so now and then fall over, haven't really launched yet. You see, I put EOS a little bit lower on the open scale as well. You know why? Because EOS, it actually costs you money to create an account. If you work with blockchains, you will notice that accounts are kind of common. And if it costs you €3 or $3 to make one, it's going to be annoying very fast, very soon. Why is NEO not open as well? NEO is a smart blockchain. Meaning you build smart contracts on this blockchain to do something. Deploying a smart contract, even something as simple as a hello world, nowadays costs about $10,000. Not open at all, because who is going to pay that to deploy one smart contract? If you can use something else that's semi-free in comparison. You also have something, this is more in the category of what people would call private blockchains. It's a proof of authority network. A proof of authority network which is also a capability of most of the Ethereum clients to run this way, which determines who can mine beforehand. We say just the first line of people can mine blocks. Everybody can join or not. That's and you let these people mine one after the other. First you, first you, first you. Big benefit, super scalable. You don't need to do proof of work. Benefit as well, why? Because neither one of these 6 people can actually do something they call a 51% attack. Why? Because it's not that person number 3 can launch 20 new servers, 20 new miners, and take over the network. He gets 1 shot out of 6 for 1 miner. Meaning you replace some of the decentralization parts by an agreement in which this works with nobody able to enforce this. Next up, there are 2 proof of authorities here. But you know why? Because on the top one, these are networks, the Kovan network. The Kovan network is a public network. Anyone can join. It's one of the test nets of Ethereum. Anyone can join this network. In an enterprise setting, you can deploy the same system and determine who gets access to it. You can say, okay, only the people in this conference can join this network, which is way less open, way less decentralized, but very fit for purpose for enterprise deployments. There are some others. You have Hyperledger Fabric. It's just one of the examples. This is not a complete list of all blockchains, by the way, which is less centralized. Why is it less centralized? Because there's one or few centralized nodes necessary to make this thing run. They use a Byzantine fault tolerant system for consensus. Multi-chain, for example, they use round robin, which is round robin plus a lot of permissions. You can actually say your account can only send transactions but not receive transactions. And this is the entire spectrum. So when we look at blockchains, you have to look at where in this graph, for my specific use case, because every use case is different. If you want to run, I was not going to cryptocurrencies, but if you want to run cryptocurrency, it better be open, centralized system. If you want to run a trade finance application, it will probably be one of these bottom ones. We believe over time, a lot of these bottom ones will slowly migrate to the middle, and we already see some of the top ones migrating to the middle as well. Where this will end, who knows? We've only been doing this for 5 to 10 years, so lots of experimentation to come. Oh, I forgot one. Just a little mind bender to close off. Smart contracts running public network. Are they open? Most of them have permissions. Can you be a permission blockchain? Can you be a permission system running on top of decentralized open network as well? Well, actually, yes. So in every layer of your architecture, there are ways to be either open, centralized, or decentralized. And it depends on the use case, what you need, and where the benefit of one of these technologies will help. And that's the key thing of today. This is a technology. Nobody, there might have been, I can't remember any presentation talking about will we use a SQL database versus a NoSQL database. This is a technical decision, a technical choice you make for a technical problem you want to solve. And I think that's it. Any questions? Yes. Okay, I'm going a little bit technical here, so bear with me. So what does what do I call super scalable? Right now, if you talk about the blockchain, if you can do 1,000 transactions per second, we call you scalable. Anything higher is probably not true. So 1,000 transactions per second. A proof of authority network, an Ethereum proof of authority network can handle 1,000 transactions a second. There have been benchmarks of them handling 50,000 transactions. The problem is, there's no way to get these transactions into the chain to mine them to blocks. It's just, you cannot do 50,000 transactions per second unless you have an incredibly wide cloud scale network setup to put them in. So scalable means between 1,000 and a few thousand transactions per second, which is what they can handle in a proof of authority setup. Yes? There's another scalability, but not we usually talk about, that's disk space usage. It's also a problem to keep everything open, but not something we took in this consideration today. Nobody else? No questions? Anything? Yes? Well, definitely not Cardano. I told you about the trilemma. When I look at blockchains, I see actually three types. If you want to be hip and fancy, you call them blockchain 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. 1.0 was digital currencies. The Bitcoins, the Moneros, the Zcashes, whatever you want. Single-purpose blockchains. Everybody decided, cool, this is working. Let's take a second one. Let's make a new one, smart contracts. Now we can do anything on this blockchain. So Ethereum, Neo, etc., etc. Now, everybody starts complaining about performance, and then some people decide, okay, we have to do something, we have to fix something, and we're going to try and solve this trilemma. And they come up with all kinds of different ways to bypass this trilemma. The delegated proof of stake ones, where people get nominated to mine. For example, this line can stake, which allows you to decrease the amount of validators, which increases your throughput, but you decrease the decentralization part to increase the scalability part. Why do I not want to talk about Cardano? Because they run a testnet with one server, and that's the only thing they have launched up until now. That doesn't count. So the best one depends. I like most of them, but it's going to be a big fight if I name one of them as one that I do like. All right, the question is, what is the most interesting use case on blockchain? In my opinion, of course, but that's the same thing. What I find the most interesting use cases are the use cases that make life better for somebody in this world. The ones where you help an NGO bring more money to people that need it. The ones where the UN or UNICEF helps refugees get an identity if they lost them. Ways that help people forward in life. In the end, if we can help one person, then it's probably worth it already. All right. Okay, I'm gonna have to say which I like most. Sorry. Yeah, so the question is, what do you like best as a blockchain to use in supply chain in the maritime sector? Or any sector. Let me tell you what we do to decide which blockchain to use. In most cases, you don't need an open one, and you need some scalability. Meaning you're in the bottom quadrant here. You might go to the top as well, but that depends a bit. So mostly the bottom quarter. You can then look at, okay, who has something in production? So the EOS and the NEOS you can just skip. The other three are usable. And then we look at, okay, what is our philosophy for the future? We have the feeling that everything will move a little bit more towards open and decentralized. And then you hit the enterprise Ethereum version, where you can actually write your smart contracts, write your logic in Solidity, and then reuse that logic at some point in time on a different version of Ethereum. But not only Ethereum, you have Quorum, Hyperledger is including it soon, I think, as a compiler. As a language, it's more a language choice at that point, where you say, okay, we feel the most flexibility for smart contract writing is in the enterprise Ethereum version. But that, like I said, if you don't need smart contracts, please don't use smart contracts, because smart contracts are hard and immutable code as a developer is something that's not fun at all. You cannot patch anything. So if you don't need to, use one of the other ones, a multi-chain, for example, or Bitcoin for that, for some use cases. The question was, why do you need decentralization for some projects and not for other projects? Let's start off with, okay, if you can run a system with just a server in your basement, please do so. Better, no question about it. If you can build a system with a few partners and you can share a database in some kind of a cloud environment, do that, better. If you are in a system where you have some kind of a trust, where you have that situation, a few partners, lack of trust between them, so you cannot run the same database because you don't know what everybody's going to do in it, use a blockchain below. If you want to use something, if you want to build something that's open to everyone, to the entire world, where you want to cut out intermediaries, all those things that we love about the idea of cryptocurrencies and the blockchain in general, then you use one of the top ones. And it's, yeah, I cannot say it any better, as it depends on the use case. Why do you use programming language A and not B? Well, B is better for this, but C is better for that. Same thing. Let me ask you a question to the audience here. How many people actually program blockchain stuff? Well, they probably get it. It's more an enhanced business question, where all the technical details of the gray area between all these between these two axes is abstracted away for a nice clickbait title. There shouldn't be a fight between public and private. If you can use a public and want to use a public, use one. If you don't use one. It's that simple. It's just a technical thing. There shouldn't be any tribalism between these two things.
All right, thank you very much, Roderick. It was quite interesting. Thank you very much. All right, now we're going to start with the panel. So, yeah, we formulated this as public versus private, as it being a fight, but I think it's just better understanding the whole thing. But for this panel, we will have one of our co-founders of Hives, was a good friend of mine, someone who knows quite a lot about blockchain. He does presentation, he gives trainings all over the world, and he's going to be the referee for tonight's panel. And that's Jean-Luc Verhelst, so please join me on the stage. Does it work, your mic?
Sure, I don't know. Yeah, there we go. Hello, everyone.
So I'll let you introduce our fighters or the people who are going to be part of the panel.
Thank you, Guillaume. Thank you for the introduction. Well, I hope it's not too much of a fight because the stage is quite small, so hopefully we'll get along. I will ask the different debaters or panelists to come forward. So we have Walter from IBM. And then we have Jennifer.
Cheer him up, cheer him up.
We have Jennifer, who is a cryptocurrency freelance consultant.
Cheer him up.
Yeah, maybe you can take the middle seats. And then we have Koen Vingerhoets from Belfius for the public side, the private side, sorry.
Side.
There he is. There you go. And then Alexander from Sofito for the public side. So maybe we have one mic for everyone, so that makes it already a bit easier to moderate. There's only one who will have a voice. So maybe to start off, maybe you can all introduce yourself a bit about what you're doing. Of course, so this side is the public side, that's the private side. And when you think you are more on the public side or on the private side. Alexander.
Yeah, I started quite early, I think 2011 with Bitcoin, and that was the major stuff. Actually, I made one of the Bitcoin wallets, which is called Mycelium. I was CTO of Mycelium back then. 2015, I started a company called Sofito, and now, with this notion, the mic is okay. With the, I was a little bit bitten by the Bitcoin decentralized horizontal. Okay, it's polarization called, like vertically polarized, horizontally. So basically now with Sofito, what we are doing, we are actually rethinking how money are working and trying to put it in the context of a ordinary bank and most importantly, an average Joe. Imagine my mother can use Bitcoin using just chip and pin card, and she doesn't have to know what is private key, what is the public address, just combining something I have, the card, and something the pin, you essentially can execute a Bitcoin transaction. So now I try to bring simplicity into a blockchain usage, and ultimately we will talk about this. I think the private blockchains will eventually have kind of tendency to transform into public more into private. So, but that's maybe for the panel.
All right, good. Jennifer?
So I started in cryptocurrency less than a year ago. I actually heard vaguely about the cryptosphere, but didn't know a lot about it. Then I worked for okay.
There you go.
And I worked 10 months. So I helped build the company from 0 to 1. And I learned a lot. And last May, I decided to end that mission. And actually, one of the things that I realized is that people know a lot about Bitcoin, but they don't know about blockchain. They don't know that there are more than 1,500 cryptocurrency behind it. So one of the things that I'm doing now is I'm giving workshops about cryptocurrencies, about what they are, what they can be used for, and how we can get them. And one other thing that I do is that I help companies to go from 0 to 1. So basically, if they're interested in launching their ICO, I help them with every stage of the process.
All right, thank you.
Hello, Walter Steers. I'm an enterprise architect at IBM. I started 3 years ago.
I think maybe a bit higher.
A bit higher,
I don't know.
Maybe. Okay, started 3 years ago. The blockchain trajectory started about 2 years ago. I'm working mainly in industries like retail, logistics, transport, distribution, the agro-food industry. And through the agro-food industry, I got in contact with one of the IBM solutions, IBM Food Trust. from that part on, we worked further on other blockchain trajectories in supply chain and logistics.
My turn. Okay, the mic. All right. Let's see how this works. My name. I work at Belfius. I work with blockchain since 2014. I've been doing quite a lot of projects by now in the banking world, of course, where we prefer to have private ledgers for several reasons. And that will be it for now.
Okay, good. Obviously, there are some issues with the micro, so someone is going to fix this, and I need to kind of for 1 minute talk, so I hope you're okay with that. But that's maybe a good moment for me to introduce Slido. You probably already all know the tool, and that should be okay. I think that's going to disappear quite soon. So you can already start asking your questions on Slido. Please ask. We're going to start with some 20-25 minutes of generic questions that we prepared to kind of set the scene, and then we're going to move on to your questions. So I'm very much looking forward to that, and you can for sure already start typing your questions. They're going to appear in 20 seconds. I'm just wondering if I still need to keep talking, or if you're good. Yeah. Okay. Let's give it a try.
Well, I expect the Bitcoin if the mic doesn't work. So.
Well, I don't know if we have that kind of funds in our small non-profit, but we can.
The question is, of course, will I ever get a Bitcoin?
Well, that's an interesting question, because Bitcoin is a public network. You're more on the private side, and you say that there are lots of reasons to consider private blockchains for the banking sector. Can you name a few of them, and why? What are the limits of the public blockchains?
Liability would be a first reason. We do take liability serious when things go wrong, like a fork, like reversal of transactions, which happened 2 years ago in Ethereum. Governance, for example, those are things that are very unclear. If you want to upgrade the code, or if we collaborate with other banks and we want to upgrade smart contracts, that would be quite impossible on a public network where you have to convince people on Reddit to do what you want. So just 3 reasons.
Okay.
Governance, liability, and
reversibility. Do you have anything to respond to that in terms of reversibility on private blockchains, or governance, liability, and so on public blockchains?
Well, I mean, we know that there is no reversibility unless there will be another parity hack fix. Probably this one actually gives a hint that private or a public blockchain, the governance is actually a big issue about the decentralization of and public chains. And the question is that if you want to have completely open blockchain, centralized, take the government's quite
the mic
seriously.
is not getting very much better, so I'm going to give you mine, and we're going to pass that one around.
Okay, so
it's a bit more artistic, but hopefully that will work.
here essentially you eliminate third party which doesn't take any liability and thus also cannot default unless there is a bug code or something like this. Then basically you are thinking of when Satoshi Nakamoto created Bitcoin, he basically didn't take any liabilities. Basically, you believe in this stack and this concept, and you use it, and at your own risk. When we want to align it with the normal economical processes, I don't know, like euro, like I mean eurozone currency, then indeed we have to align with somebody who will take liabilities on themselves, the same like a central bank has liability. And private blockchains perhaps are a good transition model for that. I mean, like from the full digital world of blockchain to, you know, paper money, which once were backed by gold.
Thank you. I'm gonna try this new skill. Okay, there we go. What we see as well between private and public blockchains is that very often in the private blockchain there is less of a token. In public blockchains there is almost always a token. how does that work in private blockchains? Do you also use tokens? Do you use them but less often? And if you do use them, what's the role of the token?
Yes, the Hyperledger fabric has the possibility to add tokens to it. So what we see mainly is that into supply chain or logistics problems, we do not have a need to insert tokens at this moment. Further use cases might need them, and as such, it's as Roderick said, we move to the middle a little bit on that side, and the use case will define it. But yes, for the possibility, what we see now as projects running inside the customers as active projects, there is no need up to now. I don't know if you have one of...
Well, it's not because it's a token that it's a cryptocurrency, of course. So if you tokenize a contract, for example, you could attribute a value to it, but only if you need a secondary market. So, and if we talk about crypto, then we know that the European Central Bank is not really supportive on that account. So I think most banks avoid putting crypto on balance because you can't evaluate it. And why would we need it internally if we have something valuable as a euro?
Okay, so you mentioned no tokens like cryptocurrencies, but you mentioned potentially other types of tokens. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Is it crypto securities, and can you maybe give us an examples of where they are used within banks?
Well, tokenization is the future. You could tokenize everything. You can make it as a loyalty coin, but then it has again a value, and the e-money legislation comes into place. But you could tokenize a contract and or a document. You could make a token out of everything and then trade it. And then if you put it on private ledgers, then we can make sure there is a system in which people know who they trade with.
Would you say we can also tokenize physical goods?
We can tokenize you.
Cool. Who wants that? Who's going to pay for that? I don't know. Anything to answer on these things from the public side?
Well, one question that I'm asking myself, and that maybe you can answer, is do we really need a token for everything? Like, isn't there a risk of having so many tokens? What do you think about that?
It's like, what is the risk having too many apps on the App Store? So basically, no, okay, token is a fundamental thing of a token is to incentivize like quasi-nobody's or quasi-nobody's network to keep the order there, you know, and to basically safeguard security or safeguard that a consensus is reached in the way it was planned, you know, and those are normally vested parties, you know, proof of stake is a very clear example of that. But per se, I wouldn't afraid to have too many tokens. It's a hype now, yeah. So it's definitely a hype. We had internet bubble hype, and probably, I think the most clear example is of surviving company is Amazon, and it's a huge corporation now. So the guy was visionary, you know, in 92, I think, was HTML announced. In 94, he opened Amazon. So probably we will get one or couple of several open, you know, public blockchains, and there will be a number of generics blockchain where Jean-Luc can be fully tokenized and traded at a light speed, you know, his parts. So I don't think it's will be an issue. I guess that just the economics will fix it anyway.
Okay, so and do you believe, because then what we hear from Koen is we do not believe in having a currency tokenized because the central bank does a good job or has already something in place that does that. Do you have a different opinion on that?
Yeah, okay, so it's like comparing, so just talking about what Koen mentioned, the liabilities, and that's why you need a private blockchain for that. It's like, who bears liability for internet to run, right? And if I have an SAP system, I know that eventually it's Oracle who invented the database, and or SAP, I can come basically knock the door. So we're comparing the internet with a database. So that's like, in my understanding, like similarities between private and public blockchain. There is completely different use cases there for that, right?
So therefore, token for the private blockchain, public blockchain, sorry. So it's essentially again a way to automatize the way the power is distributed in that. And for private blockchains, you don't need it because in fact you have several parties or one party involved, which essentially openly declares, okay, I am responsible for what is going on there, and I bear this, that liability. So that's why like your database provider is essentially, okay, something happens, here's the new update.
Okay, so interesting as a learning point is that in private blockchains you do have much more liability, and that's because all the actors of the blockchain are known. That's very different in public blockchains because there everybody is free to join. Of course, it's an open community. How do you kind of reconcile the fact that you have people who need to be granted access to the blockchain to be part of that, and how do you reconcile that with the initial philosophy of public blockchains that were meant to be open to everyone? And then maybe a secondary question, so there's one more philosophical question, and then the second question is, where do you limit? How many nodes is the limit? I guess there is a minimum of 3 probably to make things workable or that they make sense. But if you think about supply chain cases, we probably will have different nodes and thousands of nodes that at one point of time want to join the network. Do you put a limit there? And what's still the difference between this type of private blockchains and public blockchains? So 2 questions. One is, how do you reconcile the philosophy? And 2, how do you manage like a growing private blockchain in terms of nodes? Who wants to start? Walter? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I mean, first to put the question, blockchain is disruptive, and the question is, what do you want to disrupt? Do you want to disrupt society as a whole, or do you want to disrupt the supply chain and the way companies work today? And that's kind of difference in speed to disrupt. So I don't think there is a real difference, it's just the steps you take. If you look at the supply chain today, within IBM we have some projects working with supply chain, and indeed it's a challenge to get every party onboarded, and you need to have a business case for everybody in the ecosystem and a good reason to join. Now the private blockchain suddenly becomes that not everybody needs a node or needs to have a ledger on site, and what we see in some of our examples is that those people, they grant the management of data, the management of the different ledger systems to IBM as a data management company as such, which is putting scalability at a reasonable level at that site. The governance at that moment is being a governance of peers, and there the governance is being defined by the members itself, which is putting into perspective the target they have for scalability. At the moment, we do have this food trust system where we have, well, 10 companies have announced already they participate. They have hundreds of SKUs on it, so shipment shelf keeping units. They do track and trace of what's on the shelf up to where did it come from and how are lots being bundled and unbundled. They get quite some transactions running on that. It's not up to the 3,500 transactions a second, what we did do in a proof, and we have a paper for that on the table. But it's a reasonable number of transactions and giving the scalability on that side. We see that this system can be running and scaling up more and more, and we will be offering, we are still June, in 2 months, in August, we will offer it as a SaaS subscription base. So there you just enter into the blockchain services and you do not need a ledger yourself, but you can make use of the blockchain data system as such.
Okay. So what I understand from what you're saying is you have nodes that are on premises on IBM's servers then, and the data is owned by the client, but they're on your service. And you say, from what I understand, the limit in terms of growth seems to be in terms of, can you put any number, or is it technical, or?
Well, there is no maximum transaction speed defined yet, but
but when we speak about the number of nodes?
The number of nodes, at this moment we have I believe 7 nodes running. We are scaling up to 11.
Okay.
But these are physical sites. On each site we have different physical systems and different logical systems. So the number of nodes, it's much more than 7 sites.
Okay, so they could potentially scale to 1,000, something like that.
Indeed, yes.
And how do you manage? What's the advantage of having a private blockchain? Then can you hide some things in terms of data that you put on there, or what's the difference with a public blockchain?
The purpose of this SaaS subscription is that indeed you have your privacy. You have the Hyperledger channel concept in which you can define your privacy and who can see what. So that's yes, the total system has the total view, but in the channels you define who sees what in a privacy way.
Okay, very good. Good.
Quick answer to your 2 questions. The first one is not a fair question, I think, the philosophical one. What's the philosophy of hodling compared to the original ideas of Satoshi? Second, the Bitcoin blockchain is not the blockchain, it is a blockchain. We're just looking at other variations of the same ideas behind it, cryptography, gaming theory, and the internet basically. For the second question, if you have an Ethereum network, you have to start with 3 nodes. For Hyperledger, it's a different setup. But it's not about the amount of nodes you set. If we put a node up at the National Bank, for example, or at the regulator or the European Central Bank, these are institutions we trust today as well. Everybody with a bank card trusts those institutions to some extent. So I assume they will also be able to keep one little node in their data center safe, hidden, not open for forks or hacks or whatever. So I think it's just a totally different concept. If you're putting your node in a well-guarded place, you don't need nodes all over the place. You don't need to shoot a satellite into space to stream a private node down.
So we're coming back to the concept of liability and identity that the private blockchains offer on top of the public blockchains. Because we heard the private side now quite a lot, what does the public side think about this philosophical question? And we understand that it's used for different purpose, so philosophical question is maybe not really one, but maybe you have a different opinion on that, and yeah, would like to hear that.
I think that in a utopic world, it would be good to have a mix of public and private blockchain. So from the public side, it would be everything related to innovation, to the kind of freedom of speech. And from the private side, it would be the privacy, because of course when it's private, it's centralized, and isn't that a bit, in a way, against the idea of blockchain?
Okay.
Yeah, on a note about a blockchain, Bitcoin is the first one, the most secure so far, eating the most energy though. Yeah, but on a serious note, indeed, talking about the innovation, it's like imagine you need to take a permission to, make your own web page, or like permission to register domain name, etc., as if you would need a permission, or to run your even like radio station now, like on the aerial, so you would need to have a permission now from national regulator. You have to prove who you are, etc., etc. So what speed and how many radio stations can be accommodated? So now I go to YouTube, a centralized server, yeah, and basically open my channel and can monetize it, etc. So the choice which we all have now using the internet is basically we are free to choose what we listen and what we use. And by doing this, we are voting for the best innovative, the most interesting, the most value-giving application or content there. So therefore, we actually voting and making natural selection and making actually the innovation happen. So as soon as you close this, you are actually then opening it to selective people. So I just believe that in the private blockchain, the innovation is on this node is quite limited. On the other hand, you cannot reach the performances here. So you cannot reach performances like scale, the the Bitcoin blockchain as the Bitcoin blockchain as, for instance, you can scale the Hyperledger, you just add nodes, you basically do some redundant schemes, etc. But that's exactly the price you're paying. So smaller speed, it's the price for having an environment fostering innovation and, let's say, better quality content. It's exactly the price that you support this competition between different businesses proposing, their value there.
And there is more innovation because the code is open source, or because private blockchains also have open source code? How do you see that?
Well, open source is it's actually one of the best way to, for very good developers. It's a very good way to announce about their work. So, because I can say, look, I'm a developer, I work for Belfuse, then I work for KBC, but all the projects are non-disclosure. So actually, I'm very good, I'm senior, 15 years old experience, but I cannot show you anything I've been doing for the last 15 years. Now imagine, actually Peter Wuille, a Belgian guy, which is one of the core developers for Bitcoin. So he said that Google invited him just because he was posting all his work on the GitHub, which is now bought by. So on GitHub, and they said, look, you do a very great code. Do you want to work for us? And like, what are your conditions, etc., etc. So like, even on this one, that the talents can be searched, and that's exactly open source project. So that's for the side of developers. It's one real story from the Bitcoiner. So that's one of the first guys. And then another side is that, open source is indeed openly for review, open for attacks, and everyone understands the, the flip medal side of, having the pain if something basically being breached. So indeed it is actually, again, you have to be careful though, because you want to have system kind of not to crash completely. Yeah. But yes, indeed.
Okay, so what we understand here is that on one hand we say open communities, open blockchains, public blockchains, much more people involved, much more commits on GitHub, etc. On the Evolver, so more rapid innovation. But on the other side, the importance of identity, and I think even with internet, everything starts with identity, and that has a clear advantage.
Sorry, short reaction. The last thing the internet voted for was Trump, so I don't think it's such a good idea to dedicate that much power to the internet. And secondly, innovation is not tied to blockchain. Even Hyperledger Fabric is open source. Blockchain is but a part of a solution for a customer. It's but a very, very small part of the stack of solutions that we build. So I really don't see a link between the blockchain you choose, whether it will be public or private, and the amount of innovation embedded in the solution on top. We're just doing way more than shifting a coin from A to B. That's all.
And you can see what's happening in terms of innovation anywhere anyway, so yeah, makes sense. I see the questions came up, so I will move a bit over here. And the first question is, will the advent of on-chain privacy on a public blockchain render the utility of private chains to zero? Well, let me think about that once again. Will the advent of on-chain privacy, so privacy on the blockchain, on a public blockchain render the utility of private chains to zero? What are your thoughts on that?
Does the advent mean somebody made an ICO about it, or is it for real?
I don't know.
I just don't know.
Wait, yeah.
Well, you should keep your private key with you all the time, not somewhere on internet. So it's like that advent of the on-chain privacy, will be glooming or kind of boosted, being basically glorified until the advent of the quantum computer basically will become reality. So then all the information put on a blockchain, doesn't matter, can be basically decrypted, you see. So I think there is, again, we are talking about the stage approach. I think it is still smart to have a silo approach to keep some information, if you wish, even offline, which absolutely. Is the one of the best security practice all the exchanges, all the centralized exchanges are doing. So therefore, I wouldn't, put my, unless it's absolutely necessary for me to function or for my business to function, my private information there, even though I know it's encrypted, but it's now encrypted. What about tomorrow?
So what you're saying, let me resume that and tell me if I got that right, is that no matter whether private or public blockchain, just the fact you need to be very careful about what you put on a blockchain, even if it's an anonymous blockchain, because tomorrow we might be able to break it with quantum computers.
Sure.
Yeah. So Koen?
If the question is about identity, then the real problem is a word known by programmers. It's called PEPCAC. Problem exists between keyboard and chair. It's very hard to put a link between a person behind the keyboard and an online identity. And that's something where an institution like a bank could help by identifying who you are. That's why I think that on a public blockchain, identity will always be more or less futile unless somebody can ascertain there is only one me making one identity. The word identity comes from the Greek idem, meaning the same.
So banks will be in the business of identity? Will banks be in the business of identity?
Excuse me? Sorry.
Will banks be in the business of identity? No answer is also an answer.
We have to now with the GDPR. I guess now every 10th ICO is about storing your private data, having control about your private data. Talking of ICOs, we see that exactly that hype on Ethereum network, which is the use case, the killer use case for Ethereum is exactly to enable ICOs. And that's one of the examples how open blockchain not perfectly functioning at all.
Because there is a lack of identity in public blockchains.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to the next question. What drives the choice of a private blockchain instead of a simple central database? I think that's an interesting question. If you think about, especially when you mention having private blockchain stored as a service on servers, you could say, okay, what's still the added value of having a blockchain, a private blockchain, instead of having maybe a distributed database of which we throw away the keys? Yeah.
Okay, from my point of view, from the public blockchain point of view, I think that we have to also differentiate between the private blockchain and federated, right? So you have a business, you have a supply chain.
Can you maybe explain what's the difference between private and federated?
Yeah, so private can be run on one node by one organization saying, okay, look, so basically I'm managing this database, right? And the rules are like this here in white paper or in the code. So the federated is about saying, okay, look, here we are a federation, an assembly of people or businesses. We take responsibility for this, and each of us individually cannot overrule the majority. So basically we are voting to reach a consensus, and here is the mechanics of that, right? But we still can, go on oligopoly, etc., and politics and things. Returning back to the supply chain, is that it's exactly a business process where different stakeholders, somebody who sends the goods, somebody who receives, somebody who issue credits of note of credit, is it correct? Letter of credits, then those transporting, and they have actually often, go in a different direction, interest, polar, and exactly to juggle between that, to reach the balance, you can basically have a balance and consensus algorithm in a federated blockchain that none of those stakeholders, with the different purposes in the network, basically can overrule for the sake of their own interest. We're left with one microphone.
If this one doesn't work, we'll grab a beer. So that's the case for the federated blockchain. I think in the setting we speak today, we speak about federated blockchain, so at least blockchain with multiple nodes. But I'd like to pass the word to Walter. This was okay, good. So what drives the choice of a private blockchain instead of a simple central database?
Yes, indeed. Well, it's The private blockchain is really a matter of trust between different parties, as you said. I mean, the trust is that you record the actions clearly once and without disruption and without possibility to reinterpret those afterwards. And then with smart contracts, all those topics can be automated and can be processed immediately. And as a matter of fact, within the supply chain, we have one of our projects is that we just do the accounts payable in an automated way in blockchain. And in doing so, there is a very good business case. I mean, the shippers of the goods and the receivers of the goods, they immediately have clear view on what's going on, what has been shipped, when has it been received, if there are penalties, if there are complaints about delays, if there are incomplete goods. And the accounts payable application at that moment is reduced to about 1/3 of its cost by putting it on blockchain. Is this a disruption? Maybe not, but it's an optimization where quite some companies are happy to have this. And blockchain is helping there because the shipper and the receiver, they don't dispute anymore.
And so how is it different from the database? The fact that there is no, you cannot put a dot on the data itself?
Well, because the database is indeed something owned by somebody, and then they should have. Now they own the application themselves. They are a kind of ecosystem working on it, and there is no one third party owning the data. If there is someone running the blockchain, he's not looking into the data. So they own as an ecosystem the data. And maybe that's the big disruption into the supply chain thinking with blockchain. Instead of being an enterprise or a company talking to another company, suddenly you start thinking as an ecosystem from the beginning up to the end. And this is quite challenging for quite a lot of enterprises to start this way of thinking. And once you have this and you find a business case in it, the use case of the blockchain is pretty obvious to it.
Well, I have nothing to add. It's actually like that. It's about building an ecosystem, about sharing a little bit of trust, and making sure it's safe. Indeed, that's how it goes, and it's far beyond supply chain. It's everywhere we look at, we're building ecosystems because blockchain helps there. It's just a part of the stack that you share amongst each other. And if you put it up between 9 banks, for example, like in WeTrade, then you have to agree on the database, on who owns the database, who decides about the user rights, who will audit the one who decides about the user rights, who will audit the auditor. And you're going all the way until to Adam and Eve, and nothing changes. With blockchain, it does change.
So the big power sits in setting up the governance between the different stakeholders. Good. The next question is more for the public side. We mentioned that there was quite a difference in terms of scalability between what's possible on private blockchains and public blockchains. But with the Lightning Network coming up, do you see any solutions on that on public blockchains?
Okay, well, the Lightning Network is apparently a solution which is now basically kind of decided by the majority or with the majority votes. What do we have? Something like up to 2,000 transactions per second now you can handle on the Lightning node. So I think it's a huge step forward. It adds a little bit of, it's improved this complexity like the internet of early days before the HTTP was also a completely different internet now. I also, actually, I a little bit regret that there was no basically increase in terms of, if you look at Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, I mean, I'll just add another dimension here. So Bitcoin with the Lightning Network and then Bitcoin Cash, if we take out the issue how it was incepted, in fact becomes more decentralized with the bigger blocks, but also carries or requires a higher payload, in terms of the bigger blocks to be stored and piled up. But the Lightning Network, it's exactly the solution which came out of the pain. So we have a public something working not good, and there was a huge debate, and it's indeed a big again prize for open network to reach a consensus, and the consensus has been reached for Lightning. It's one of the solutions we will see. It's the world of experiments. I mean, but probably we will move in a good direction. Adds a kind of a vector, in fact, to sort of semi-private channels. Like the private networks also will be moving into more public eventually, because you would prefer with your supply chain to become more and more people be on board, that consortium become bigger and bigger because it brings more business to you, right? And if we just take extrapolation on that, you basically can become like much more open and actually much bigger network from 20 nodes to 2,000.
Thank you. So you're basically saying that the Lightning Network allows for more transactions, and that's a way to scale, but with things going on off-chain, while still storing a certain elements of truth in the public blockchain. Next question is, does a centralized blockchain need blocks? I think so. Because in these systems, every transaction is a block, isn't it just a database with different branches? Well, maybe just to clarify, I think you will agree with me that every private blockchain has blocks, and that in blocks there is different types of information, more than just one information. Yeah, isn't it just a database with different branches? I would say, isn't it just a database by the fact that, well, I'll let you answer, but to me it seems more that because there's this governance that has been set up, it becomes a database, but the power lays in the governance that has been set up. But please correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, it's not about the branches, it's about the hashing tied to the blocks, which makes the past immutable. And whether you put one transaction in a block or 1,000 transactions in a block, the private ledger, it matters less. I mean, if we're sending out a contract or putting an SKU on the chain, it's not about double spending something. If the same hash is twice on the ledger, nobody cares, it's still the same document. If you put the same Bitcoin twice on the ledger, that would be an issue. So it's really totally different system, but we would like to have the immutability of the history, and that's why we need blocks, and they are chained to each other with a hash. Underneath is still a normal database.
That leads me maybe to the next question. What is the best way to interoperate between private and public blockchain? Is it to store that immutability? And then maybe extending to that, how do you see interactions happening in the future? Do you see things like data portability possible and those kind of things? Who wants to take the questions? The architect.
To be honest, I think we are not yet there. As of now, the most of the blockchain projects are just interconnecting existing applications to the blockchain and making them a transparent whole system. So having your ERP working with the blockchain and reading the blockchain as if it's a trusted data source. I think this can be extended in one way or another towards public blockchains. But I know there is a lot of thinking about it, but I don't know any real status at this moment, to be honest. Don't know if you have something.
For the public blockchains, with the private it's quite basically clear. Like there are two private blockchains, two directors of these blockchains meet, they sign an agreement and basically connect the nodes eventually with a smart contract or not, which represents basically the agreement. Okay, so the governance is there easy. Now, if we take public blockchains, there is an issue. To start is just the what is the consensus algorithm? So the transfer proof of work to proof of stake chains, that's in fact the issue. So for instance, I have a blockchain with proof of stake, with blockchain with proof of work, and how can I correlate this and then the volatility stuff. On the status, I guess there are several. I think the most notable is Polkadot for me. I believe they are going to release something like workable, meaningful, I mean, like in the production at about almost 2 years from now. So that's the work in progress, because it's indeed, actually, it's a very multifaceted problem, because you solve the problem how to transfer the governance between differently designed network with already settled working different consensus algorithms. So it's actually quite a task. It's like how to combine, you know, a helicopter with you know, subway, right? So because you want to go up and down, etc. So it's exactly, so probably you need to have a stop somewhere called airport, you know, where you just get out of the train and get into your plane. And that's actually then the weakest link in speed, you see?
Thank you. So basically saying that you're not just transferring data, but you should also think about the governance that you're transferring from one blockchain to the other, and that's even more important. Very good.
Questions on supply chains, saying that supply chains are trustless due to the dependency on rework data. So we, again, speaking about the physical world and the digital world, how do you make the bridge between them, and how do you make sure that the data from the physical world is actually what is reflected in the blockchain? Do we in this case even need a blockchain, or do companies just need to share more data amongst themselves? So what's the added value of blockchain in this case?
Once again, the word is about trust and governance. Yeah, the matching of the physical to the digital is one of the challenges, and within IBM we announced a 5-year research initiative which we call Crypto Anchors, to have crypto technology on physical devices and put these technologies related to blockchain items to guarantee these physical to digital mapping. But today we do it mostly by using the existing standards. I mean, in the supply chain there is a GS1 standard which is being used for years in food and apparel and some other industries. And mapping these to digital goods, to digital representation, is pretty easy and reliable. And what's then being done is that you can see the history far more than what you know today, because today transparency is done in a way that you can see one back and one forth, and if you put it on blockchain you can see from the beginning all steps up to yours, and then seeing all further details. And having these available to you is putting the value of the blockchain, and is giving you, if there is something happening, like we had the Roman lettuce problem in States, this could have been solved in seconds if this was on blockchain. And so there are 5 people died in the States because there was no traceability and tracking from root to consumer. Is this a value? Is this why you need blockchain? I believe Roderick mentioned this is a value of blockchain, yes. People get better out of it.
It's indeed an issue of trust, but that's also in the public space. So Satoshi also started with 1 node, not with 1,000 nodes. The next one also need to have trust that it works. And if you send out Bitcoin, the only thing you know for sure in a transaction is that the account that sends has at least the amount of Bitcoin that is being sent. Anything else is just hope and trust that it works.
Okay, so dependency on the real world data, I think it's about us changing the paradigm of not delegating digital us to somebody else. You know, the problem is can be solved if we can all use, like I have my fingerprints, I have my iris scan, and that's me. And if I type it in a digital form and I can present it to a device, I can prove that it's me. With, yeah, basically, now a question is that it's my house, I can basically verify with my private key. So I can say, okay, look, I'm Alexander, I have this private key. I don't say you which one, but you know, I can basically sign the transaction. And if I can sign this, basically that's direct proof that I'm in possession of this private key. So, and I think that's the point that at certain moment, either our private keys will be tied to our biometrics or to a device or to something where we have an ultimate control of that. And by controlling this, we are actually checking in a physical event or a physical good belonging to us or us basically into the digital world. But that's indeed this distraction is something in our heads which we are not used to do. Our banking cards is completely delegated how our funds are managed. Our information about us is basically kept by, you know, I recently learned that Google has about 20 gigabytes of data of each of us. If you have Gmail account, browse Chrome. So that's basically you, and they possess digital you much more than yourself.
Thank you. So I remember that trust is what it is all about. So indeed, you cannot make really the link between the physical and the digital world, but at least you create an audit trail, which can then be audited. So maybe there is more work to be done on the audit side instead of trying to find out what is actually happening, because there's already a trace on things. And then I understand as well that identity and the fact to identify physical objects, even humans, is an essential part of that as well, but we need to be careful about what we use. Is a fingerprint really a good way of using it, or is it too easy to tamper with? And I see clearly Koen and Walter saying that it's maybe not the best way to identify a human being. So maybe one last question that I want to ask to each one of you is what do you think is the advantage of having a blockchain of the other side? And I think we already covered a bit, but if there's one thing you personally would like to pass through, what would it be?
Okay. You know, when you want to get a new regulation, you're a country, you are making a regulatory sandbox. And that's exactly a private blockchain where you can experiment with new laws and you allow some participants, well-controlled environment, pre-selected participants with some futuristic governance exactly or laws which you actually want to test. In terms of you want to test the technology, yeah? For instance, how do you anchor your physical to digital you in the blockchain? So these are actually, for me, are sandboxes which are perfect to play. And then the ultimate goal on every sandbox to get this legislation, just legal stuff, to the outside world, to something more public, to the broader country. And then basically what we are doing, the country adopts all the legislation. And then the country forms unions and they homogenize their governance system or their laws, like we are trying to do in European Union. But the way to start the sandbox is actually perfect. And then you just don't have to, we are in Europe, we have a very perfect example how we are from sandboxes, our tribes and villages, now grown in actually very amazing, very complex ecosystem of different languages, different cultures, united already by one European condition and by one European currency. So.
Well, today everything is about speed and access, and I think that the positive thing about the private blockchain is that everything goes faster than the public one.
Okay, I believe the public one is giving an opportunity to include maybe communities you could not reach from a private directly. So having the gateway is maybe the best thing to have and get then those communities out there.
So a lot of information is supposed to be private, but other information could as well be public, like hashes of documents, of contracts you sign, things that are really not protected by any law or legislation, which is still important. And I think that the public blockchain could be an excellent store of value for any document you have. Why not? It's there anyway. So.
Thank you. That's very nice to hear that there are advantages of both, and I think that was clear throughout the panel. It was very clear that from a business and a scaling technical point of view, private blockchains do have quite some advantages, namely in terms of liability, in terms of identity checks, and in terms of technical performance. But on the other side, we also do understand that the public blockchains do have quite some advantages when it comes on to innovation, the fact to include more people and so on. So it looks like both worlds will work together probably, one leveraging probably the benefits of the other. And I think that was very clear throughout the panel. So I would like to ask for a warm applause for panelists. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much for being here, for being part of the panel, for I think clarifying more what the differences are and what the advantages of each are. Now I have a question. Who here believes more in public blockchains? Just raise your hand. All right. And who believes more in private blockchains? That's nice. Who's neutral on the question? Okay. Nice. What? And who changed his mind because of the panel? That's one brave guy. Nice. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now there will be a break of 30 minutes. Enjoy it to grab some food. You have some food right in front of the bar. Grab a drink. The food is free. Don't forget that there is some virtual reality experience right there. Augmented reality in the middle. And in the dark room, there is a crypto cave where in 10 minutes you will have a presentation. And if you want to attend the presentation in the crypto cave, just put your name on the first sheet. Thank you very much and see you in 30 minutes.